Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Supreme Court nominee Elena Kagan has wrapped up her last day of testimony as confirmation hearings enter their final phase. Supporters and critics of Kagan will appear today before the Senate Judiciary Committee votes on sending her nomination to the full Senate. Concluding Wednesday's session, Senate Judiciary Chair Patrick Leahy praised Kagan's bid.
You demonstrated an impressive, I'd say an encyclopedic knowledge of the law. And we can see why so many of your students, and many of whom I've met here during these hearings, consider you a wonderful teacher of the law. And I take so seriously what you pledge all of us here, that you will do your best to consider every case impartially, modestly, with commitment to principle, in accordance with law. Solicitor General Kagan, I believe you, and we stand in recess.
If ultimately confirmed, Kagan's addition would mark the first time 3 women serve on the Supreme Court. The House has approved a sweeping overhaul of financial regulation following over 3 weeks of conference committee negotiations. The 237 to 192 vote came as the Senate postponed its vote on the measure until at least mid-July, setting the stage for a final showdown over the bill after the July 4th recess. The measure would create a consumer protection agency within the Federal Reserve, impose new limits on the derivatives market, and restrict trading by banks for their own benefit. But it also lacks several initial provisions that were removed under intense Wall Street lobbying. At a speech in Wisconsin shortly before the vote, President Obama criticized Republicans for opposing financial reform. Obama singled out recent comments by House Republican leader John Boehner.
The leader of the Republicans in the House said that financial reform was like, I'm quoting here, using a nuclear weapon to target an ant. That's what he said. He compared the financial crisis to an ant. This is the same financial crisis that led to the loss of nearly 8 million jobs. Same crisis that cost people their homes, their life savings. He can't be that out of touch with the struggles of American families.
In other news from Washington, Republicans have again filibustered a vote on extending unemployment benefits to millions of jobless workers. More than 1.2 million people have stopped receiving checks since their benefits expired last month. The Senate Environment and Public Works Committee has voted to remove a liability cap for offshore spills in the wake of the BP oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. If enacted, the lifting of the current $75 million cap would apply retroactively. BP is facing new accusations of using a toxic dispersant to deliberately hide the size of the oil spill in the Gulf. In an interview with CNN, Dallas investment banker Fred McAllister said the dispersant has been used to sink the oil in order to minimize BP's financial liability.
The issue that BP is facing right now is whether to use what's practices that are normal around the world, which is to try to cause the oil to come to the surface and then deploy the right amount of equipment and the right type of equipment to gather that oil up and get it out of the Gulf. Using the dispersants allows the oil to stay under the surface, and this accomplishes several purposes. It makes it a lot more difficult to quantify the amount of oil that's coming out, which has a direct impact on damages and royalties that have to be paid. It keeps it out of sight and out of mind, and it allows BP to amortize the cost of the cleanup over several years, 10 to 15 years.
McAllister says BP has also rebuffed his attempts to organize a fleet of foreign skimmers to assist with the cleanup effort, claiming the company's fearful the skimmers could help expose the spill's size. The U.S. government, meanwhile, has fined BP's U.S. subsidiary $5.2 million for what it calls false, inaccurate, or misleading reports about energy production on Native American land. The Interior Department says BP misrepresented information about prices and royalty rates it paid to lease wells from Colorado tribes. The Senate has unanimously approved the nomination of General David Petraus to command U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan. The vote came 1 week after President Obama fired General Stanley McChrystal and tapped Petraus to replace him. Petraus has vowed to review rules intended to reduce Afghan civilian casualties. Shortly before the vote, Republican Senator John McCain praised Petraus's nomination.
David Petraus has proved that he is a winner and we need to give him every opportunity and remove every obstacle so that he can help the United States and our allies win in Afghanistan. General Petraus has my full support.
General Petraus takes the helm after more than 100 foreign soldiers have been killed in Afghanistan in June, making it the bloodiest month for NATO forces there since the U.S.-led invasion in 2001. We'll have more on Afghanistan after headlines. The House Agriculture Committee has voted to undo a decades-long ban on U.S. travel to Cuba and to scale back restrictions on the sale of U.S. goods there. The measure must now clear 2 other House panels before going before the full House, followed then by the Senate. Clashes erupted at the Puerto Rican capital in San Juan Wednesday after police forcibly prevented protesters from attending a legislative session on the state capital. Officers used batons, physical force, and pepper spray to block a large group that included many students seeking a voice in the Puerto Rican budget. Student organizers say over 24 protesters were treated for injuries. The clashes come just over a week after University of Puerto Rico students voted to end their 2-month strike against budget cuts, fee hikes, and school privatization. You can go to our website at democracynow.org to see the images of the protests and go back to hear the discussions we've had with the students and professors at the University of Puerto Rico. In Israel and the occupied territories, a new report says Palestinian children in some areas of the West Bank are enduring a worse humanitarian crisis than children in Gaza. According to Save the Children, the plight of children living in the 60% of the West Bank that remains under full Israeli administration has reached, quote, a crisis point. The Israeli and U.S. governments have long touted improved living conditions in the West Bank to counter criticism of the occupation. An Israeli peace group is calling for the dismantling of the Israeli government commission examining Israel's deadly raid on the Free Gaza Movement's Freedom Flotilla that killed 9 people. Israeli peace activist Uri Avneri of the group Shalom says the inquiry is too limited in scope.
The most important one is how did the government decide on this action and how this action was actually implemented. This remains outside the terms of reference of the Commission, and therefore we should go on with our petition to the Supreme Court to disband this Commission and to appoint a state commission of inquiry.
The first shipment of aid seized from the flotilla began arriving in the Gaza Strip Wednesday under an agreement with the UN to distribute the goods. A new study says the U.S. corporate media drastically reduced its use of the word torture after its practice by the Bush administration became widely exposed. Researchers at Harvard University found newspapers almost uniformly describe waterboarding as torture dating back to the 1930s. But when it was revealed as a common tactic under President Bush, the same newspaper stopped using the word torture almost entirely. Whereas the New York Times had previously characterized waterboarding as torture in 81.5% of the articles, from 2002 to 2008, it characterized waterboarding as torture in just 1.4% of the articles. And the American Civil Liberties Union is suing the U.S. government to challenge a no-fly list that has in some cases stranded Americans abroad. The suit was filed Wednesday on behalf of 10 U.S. citizens or permanent residents prevented from boarding U.S.-bound flights. Ben Wisner of the ACLU's National Security Project said, quote, there is simply no legal basis for placing a U.S. citizen into involuntary exile, and to use a secret government list without any process to accomplish that goal is unconstitutional, he said. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.